In this lesson, we'll begin rigging the landing gear. So let's start by getting an idea of the system we'll need to design. We need a way to find the open and closed state of our landing gear. Currently we have the open state, so we'll need to find what position it should be in when it closes, and then we'll go ahead and set up a constraint to blend between the two states, and then we can tie the weight of the constraint into user data. So let's say we get started by first creating a set of data. We'll add that to our animation control, as we've done with the others. So with that selected, let's go ahead and choose Manage User Data. We'll select our very top group, Extra Controls, and add a new group. We'll rename this group to Landing Gear Control. Now with the group still selected, let's go ahead and add data, and we can go ahead and rename this to Expand _ Collapse. Okay, so the way this will work is when we're at 0, the landing gear will open, and at 100% it will close. Let's go ahead and choose OK. And now, finding our landing gear group, again, if you need to, you could always use scroll to first active after selecting one of the objects tied to that group, but either way, with it selected, we can now go ahead and freeze its transforms. And now we're ready to create a set of objects we can use to capture its open and closed state. So we can work with nulls. Let's go ahead and create a null. I'll head over to the Object tab and I'll start to adjust its display so it's easier to work with. So I'll go ahead and set the display to point, the radius can go ahead and bring up to about 80, and the orientation to XY. Alright, so now if we were to go to our Move tool with the E key, we can go ahead and move this forward, and there is our first null. Let's go ahead and rename it. That's going to be NDRV, since this will drive the state of our landing gear. I like to work with this prefix, and then at that point we can go ahead and add more to the name so we know what it's for. Very important. So that's landing gear _ open 01. Okay, next we'll go ahead and clone this with Control-C, Control-V, and we'll give this a suffix of close 01. We need to make sure that both of these nulls will be added to our pivot control. That way, as we start to move this, the landing gear will always follow. The landing gear is going to be tied to these null objects. So again, we just need to make sure that it will follow correctly with the rest of the rig. So I'm going to go ahead and take these two nulls and add them both to the pod control. Alright, great. So now what we need to do is again find the open and closed state of our landing gear. We already have the open state, so what we'll do then is tie the open null to the current state of our landing gear. With it selected first, the object we need to align or constrain, we then go in and select our landing gear. Here it is. I'll go ahead and control click that. And in that order, we can now choose Constraints, PSR Constraint. And notice now that our first null has aligned to the open state of our landing gear. Alright, great. What I'd like to do is go ahead and make a copy of the Objects Manager. It might be easier to work with our objects this way. I'll go ahead and expand the landing platform, and I'll actually just use scroll to first active so we can find our null object. Now we no longer need this constrain tag. It's done its job. It's aligned the null, so let's go ahead and remove it. And now we'll need to go ahead and close our landing gear. So let's go ahead and grab the landing gear group, and I actually have some values we could put in to move it in place. So that will be as follows. In our position y-axis, let's put in a value of 48.524. In our position z-axis, let's go ahead and put in a value of 13.253. And now to rotate it down, in our pitch axis, we'll put in a value of 16.461. Great. All right, so once that's in place, we can now go ahead and match its position with the second null. All right, so with that selected, again, we'll go ahead and control click our landing gear, and we'll use another PSR constraint. All right, so notice the second null has been aligned to that very position, and we no longer need its tag, so let's go ahead and delete it. All right, so now that we have our two states, we're ready to constrain to both nulls. So let's go ahead and we will first select our landing gear. Following that, we'll go in and we'll select the open null. So again, in that order, we can now go ahead and choose character constraint, PSR constraint. You can see how the landing gear pops back to its open state. And if we were to go ahead and grab that null object, you can see that we can now drive the landing gear. We shouldn't need to animate these nulls at all. What we will animate, however, is the blend attribute tied to the constraint. Let's go ahead and select the constraint tag tied to our landing gear. We can go ahead and rename it. That's going to be PSR constraint underscore landing gear. All right, so from there we'll go to the PSR tab, and you can see here what has been locked down. We don't need scale to be influenced at all, so we can go ahead and uncheck that. And let's go ahead and add a target now. We'll go ahead and click on add. And the next target we need to add is the close null. So just add that in, and now we have a blend between the two. So watch this. If we were to go ahead and zero out the open null, notice how the landing gear closes. If we were to increase the open null to 100% and then drop the weight of the close null, you can see that that drops our landing gear. So what we could do then is set up a set-driven key so that we can go ahead and blend between these two channels, but then we'll need one of these values to go in reverse. So let's say we go ahead and stop the lesson here. In the next lesson, we will finish rigging our landing gear.